welcome back. Of course, we just recognized the 50th anniversary of the assassination of JFK, and one man who we all saw over and over and over and over again in that video that we've watched, over the years, a man who we had not heard from until recently. He's now author of a book that involves other former U.S. Secret Service agents, 5 Days in November. And he is the man who jumped on the back of the limo. He was assigned with guarding the First Lady on that day in Dallas. We are joined right now by Clint Hill. Mr. Hill, it is a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here.
Is it cathartic in any way? I mean, after all these years to be talking about this, and did you talk about this much away from the microphones with family, with friends, or was it something you didn't discuss at all?
We never discussed it at all. Even among the agents, I never talked about it with my family or my friends until about 2009, when a young lady named Lisa McCubbin, who was assisting another former agent in writing a book called The Kennedy Detail, came to me because they needed some assistance in writing about what happened in Dallas. And I reluctantly agreed to assist them, and that began a process where I was able to unload some emotional baggage that I had held within myself for a number of years, and it proved to be very emotional, beneficial to me, and very cathartic, and I am very pleased that I actually decided to do that.
Well, I know that we're all pleased that we're getting to hear from you about this moment in history. Certainly, were you how hard were you on yourself? In the days, weeks, months, and years afterward?
Well, I took a great deal of blame for what had happened. I felt a great deal of guilt because I felt that I should have been able to do more. And so over a period of years from 1963 until about 1982, I was very, very hard on myself. And I gradually began to improve. And then by 1990, I went back to Dallas. And that was the best thing I could have done.
Now, you were assigned to guard the First Lady. You tell some very interesting stories about that, but talk about hearing what you heard and jumping on. We could put the picture up of you jumping on the limo. Of course, something we've all seen. How did that happen? What are you thinking? What are you seeing?
Well, as we traveled through Dallas, we got to a point where we were going down Elm Street, right in front of the Texas School Book Depository, approaching an expressway, and I was on the car immediately behind the presidential vehicle on the left-hand side of the running board in the forward position, and I had been scanning to my left, and I heard this explosive noise over my right shoulder. And I immediately started to turn towards that noise, but I only got as far as the presidential vehicle, and I saw the president's reaction. He was seated in the right rear seat of that vehicle, and I saw that he grabbed at his throat. He moved to his left. I knew that was very unusual. Something was wrong, and so I jumped from my position running toward the presidential vehicle in an attempt to get up on top of the back of it to form a shield or barrier there so that no further damage could be done to the president.
When you say you grabbed his throat, was that from the one shot that hit him, or was that the first shot that didn't hit him, or what? I mean, if from what I understand, he suffered a grave head wound, and we're all familiar with those pictures as well. So at what point can you explain that he grabbed his throat and moved to his side?
That was the very, very first shot, and that was actually the first shot did in fact hit him. First shot hit him just below the neckline.
Okay.
And to the right of the spinal column and exited through the throat. And that was the very first shot that was fired.
Right. And now, again, pointing out, by the way, we're talking to Clint Hill, former U.S. Secret Service agent, the man who was assigned on that fateful day in Dallas to guard the First Lady and protect the First Lady. And he's the co-author of 5 Days in November, just an amazing, amazing book. probably of all of them that have been written from the perspective of the Secret Service. It's just a fascinating read, very educational. Tell us about your first contact, words, glances, facial expressions with the First Lady, either on your part or her part.
Well, as I approached the vehicle itself, the presidential vehicle, there was a third shot that hit the president in the head. And it was very explosive in nature. It entered the right rear of the head, and lower in the back of the head, and exited the upper right rear quadrant of the skull. But it was so explosive that it caused an eruption of material. And that material came over myself to the rear of the car, Mrs. Kennedy. It was blood, brain matter, and bone fragments. And when that happened, Mrs. Kennedy got up in the trunk of the car trying to retrieve some of that material. She was trying to gather it together. I got up in the back of the car. She didn't know I was there, but I got my hands on her and I put her in the back seat. And when I did that, why, the president's body fell farther to its left with his head in her lap. And then I could see his eyes were fixed. I could see the hole in the upper right rear of the skull. None of the brain matter in that area was still there. It was all destroyed. So I assumed it was fatal.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mrs. Kennedy had very little to say. I mean, she was in shock. And what she did say was, I had his brains in my hand. And then she said, oh, Jack, what have they done? Jack, I love you, Jack. And that was all she did say.
And, of course, she would say more to you later on. First of all, she wouldn't, I believe, leave the body of her husband at the hospital. Talk about that. But then also later on, she selflessly came up to you and asked you about how you were. Talk about those things.
Well, yes, we were on board Air Force One when that happened. And, we were about to witness the swearing in of Vice President Johnson to become the next president when Mrs. Kennedy sent word that she wanted to talk to me. She was seated in the rear of the aircraft near the president's casket, and I was forward of the aircraft. And I then went back through the presidential suite to where she was, and as I approached her, she stood up and grabbed my hand and said, oh, Mr. Hill, what's going to happen to you now? She was very concerned about me, and I said, I'll be okay, Mrs. Kennedy, I'll be okay. She was concerned about how I was reacting to what had happened, but also to the fact that she knew that the administrations had now changed. It was no longer the Kennedy administration, it was the Johnson administration, and she was concerned about what my next assignment would be.
Did it hit you at the time that in the midst of all this, that she summoned you to the back and asked you these questions, or did it take a while longer? And if so, how long before you said, "My goodness, this woman did an amazingly, remarkably unselfish, caring thing for me"?
Well, it hit me right away because I was very surprised, and I knew that she was about to have to stand next to Vice President Johnson as he was sworn in, and she really hadn't changed herself physically to prepare for that. She hadn't cleaned up. She was covered with blood. And so it was extremely surprising to me, but very typical of her. She was always concerned about how I was doing or how the other agents were doing.
We're talking to Clint Hill, former U.S. Secret Service agent, here on the Steve Malzberg Show. Do you have your own theories? Did you follow and believe the Warren Commission? And do you believe that there was a connection, at least with Ruby? And were you surprised that Oswald? How'd you react? First of all, let me ask you this, 'cause I'm asking you a million questions. How did you react when Oswald was shot?
Well, I didn't find out till it had happened. I mean, it was over a little while before we found out, because we were busy at the White House transporting the body of the president from the White House to the U.S. Capitol when that took place.
Right.
So I was very shocked when it happened and disappointed because we really wanted to interrogate him. We wanted to get into his head and find out why, what was his motive, and we never had that opportunity.
Did Mrs. Kennedy, were you still with her at the time? And if so, how did she take the news of Oswald's assassination?
I don't even know that anybody bothered to tell her at the time that it happened.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody, I'm sure, she found out later, but
sure.
she was so involved at that particular time, accompanying her body of her husband, the president,
Sure.
up to the U.S. Capitol.
What about the kids at the time? I mean, how much of if you know, if you were privy to it, how much of the hands-on was done by her, telling the kids, preparing the kids? I mean, you know, or did she have a lot of help in doing that?
Well, the initial time that the children were notified, Caroline specifically, because at the time, John was not quite 3, and Caroline was not quite 6.
Right.
So they were very young. But the nanny, Maud Shaw, was the one who actually advised Caroline of what had happened.
Who was that, sir?
Maud Shaw, S-H-A-W.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay.
She was the children's nanny.
I gotcha. Now, so let me ask you, you were there. I mean, you know, so you heard the bullets, you heard the shots, you saw the shots, the effect of the shots. Do you agree with what's been put forth as the official, you know, the Warren Commission, I guess, is the standard bearer for the explanation, or do you doubt that, and do you have your own theories of who was behind it or what might have happened, or tell me.
Well, I know that there were only 3 shots fired that day in Dealey Plaza. I know that all 3 shots did come from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. They were all fired through the same rifle by the same individual, Lee Harvey Oswald. There isn't any question about that.
And
I do differ with the Warren Commission about what happened to the second shot. I think the second shot was the one that hit the governor. So did the governor, and so did his wife.
Okay, as opposed to the bullet going through the president and hitting the governor?
Yes, I don't believe in the magic bullet theory.
Yeah. When you look at the protection from afar that our presidents have today, do you believe they're, I mean, God forbid, but more vulnerable, less vulnerable than obviously they don't ride really in open limos, but they do, you know, walk. Obama and Biden and others have walked the route from inauguration to the White House. So how do you feel security has improved over the years?
Well, I think the challenges for the Secret Service in providing that protection is greater today than it ever has been. And I think that they do a remarkable good job considering all the things they have to face. But there's always that one chance in a million that it could happen.
One more question very quickly. The Limousine, you came face-to-face with it again at you were giving a speech at, I don't know if it was at a museum somewhere around the country. Is that the first time you had seen it? And we got less than a minute. How did it feel? From what I read, you didn't really look directly at it while you were talking.
Well, I was out in Michigan, at Dearborn, Michigan, the Ford Museum, where they have the Limousine house. I did see it. It was not the first time I'd seen it. I'd seen it since then, so I was used to seeing it.
Okay.
But it's still a very vivid reminder of what had happened.
Listen, sir, God bless you, and I'm glad you found some peace with this, and thank you for sharing. And again, folks, the book, 5 Days in November, just a riveting read. And thank you. Have a happy Thanksgiving, sir.
Thank you very much, and the same to you and your listeners.
Thank you. Thank you. That's Clint Hill. What a pleasure to be able to speak with him. We're coming back, folks. Steve Malzberg Show, Newsmax TV and radio.